Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. An international organization will soon offer advice on searching for unmarked graves on the sites of former residential schools. But not everyone is happy. The federal government signed a $2 million agreement with the Netherlands-based International Commission for Missing Persons, also known as ICMP. APTN's Fraser Needham has more, starting off with what exactly is the ICMP.
In this ICMP video, the organization explains how it specializes in finding missing people, such as the tens of thousands of people estimated to have gone missing since Russia invaded Ukraine a year ago. ICMP Director General Catherine Baumberger says they provide communities with expertise, including how to exhume human remains and do DNA analysis if they decide they want to go that route.
We also work extremely closely with communities, especially survivors of missing persons cases, to build their understanding of the process. And I think this will be very important with Indigenous communities in Canada, living in Canada, is to understand what their options are. But I think we believe very firmly that the families of the missing have rights. They have rights to justice, to the truth, and to proper reparations.
The ICMP wants to learn what the options are through dozens of planned engagement sessions. Winnipeg journalist Sheila North has signed on with the ICMP to help facilitate those sessions, and she's anxious to get to work.
It's very important work. I come from a family of survivors as well, and I know the importance of doing this for our communities and for our families. This is a form of justice for me. As you know, I worked on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls cases and issues for many years, and missing children at residential schools takes on another form of this sad reality.
Cynthia Wesley Eskima of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation says she is skeptical of the government's intentions by bringing the ICMP on board.
I just think they're covering their butts, really. I think they're trying to say, well, you know, this is really important. And I understand that this is a Canadian. I mean, this is the other thing we want to really point out. This is not an Indigenous issue. This is a Canadian issue. This is about the history of this country from its inception as a colonial body.
Baumberger says she is aware of some of the criticisms, but is hopeful this does not affect ICMP's work going forward.
I think, you know, working with the interlocutor and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is hugely important. We need to be partners in this, and that's what we hope to be. Because I hope this is not a controversial issue. I mean, I think it's something that, as I said, is high time.
The technical agreement says the ICMP will submit a final report to the government on June 15th, but Baumberger says the deadline has been extended and the report will likely be filed sometime in September. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
In Thunder Bay, the deputy chief of that city's police service is returning to work. Ryan Hughes had been suspended since January of last year, while an external investigation was underway into a series of allegations. After a thorough investigation of a complaint regarding internal service matters by an external police service, all but two of the allegations against Deputy Chief Hughes were found to be unsubstantiated. The two substantiated allegations relate to the improper disclosure of police information to senior officers of the Thunder Bay Police Service and a deputy police chief with another service. The board says it has taken appropriate corrective action. The Thunder Bay Police Services Board is expected to name a new chief of police in the coming months. A grand jury in Nevada indicted Nathan Chasing Horse on 19 counts of criminal activity yesterday. Chasing Horse was previously charged with sexual assault, trafficking, and child abuse, and also faces charges of kidnapping, lewdness, and drug trafficking. The charges against the Dances with Wolves actor come from multiple jurisdictions. Chasing Horse has been in custody in Las Vegas since he was arrested January 31st. In early February, Tsuut'ina First Nation police near Calgary said they'd also filed for arrest warrants connected to alleged Nevada offenses. It's believed at least 2 victims are from Sutina, and another is from Kermios, BC. Sutina police haven't responded to inquiries about the pending charges. The North Las Vegas court website says if he can post bail, Chasing Horse would be subject to house arrest and electronic monitoring. APTN's Tina House recently traveled to Port Alberni, BC, where the Seychat First Nation revealed they have discovered 17 suspected unmarked graves. Now we hear from one of those survivors about their experience. Tina House has more.
Today, Wally Samuel walks through what used to be the girls' playground with his son Ed at the former Alberni Indian Residential School. He was just 8 years old when he was forced to come here from his village of Ahousaht on the west coast. But he says the horrific memories are as vivid as if they just happened yesterday.
I came from a village where I was free to do what I want. But when we got here, it was like it's like coming to a prison or jail, you know. We under so many rules, changed our clothing, cut our hair, you know, and we weren't allowed to visit our relatives, especially the female relatives on this side. We had cousins and sisters on this side. We weren't allowed to visit them. It was lonesome, you know, taken out of your village, out of your family.
But despite all odds and not being able to talk with females while at the school, Wally met his future wife Donna at AIRS. They had a family and are still together after all these years. And together they've worked hard to try and heal.
After we got out of here, we just worked. We worked and worked, kept our minds on the job. And luckily we had cultural people from our communities that re-taught us, revived our culture. They said, you know it, because they knew me as a kid at home. They helped us relearn our culture. That made us stronger, being proud of who we are.
But Wally says what took place here still continues to haunt him.
And we were forced to do things. That was the hard part, being forced to do things, practice things they wanted us to. You know, as kids, we enjoyed our lifestyle at home there. Never ever got forced to do anything. So it was the environment here. It was very violent and abusive. The supervisors were mean. They didn't give a hell about us, you know. We were like their prisoners.
Like so many others APTN has talked to, kids at residential schools were always in survival mode.
The food wasn't very good, wasn't very much. In fact, there was a furnace here, garbage burning furnace. Me and my friends used to steal potatoes and roast our potatoes with the garbage. That's how we kept food. You know, and we'd go out to the reserve and steal apples, and we'd be stealing food. I just realized why we were doing that. We were hungry all the time, eh?
And with the news that the Seychat First Nation have discovered that 67 kids died at the school and have uncovered 17 suspected unmarked graves on the property after searching just 12%, Wally, who is part of the advisory team, says there is still a lot to uncover.
We advised ground searchers to look there in the hills, and there's a little farm down here we asked them to look at, and, you know, so.
Did you hear stories about kids going missing when you were here?
No, not while I was here, no. I never heard any, you know. We never really noticed it. We thought maybe they went home, you know. So some people did come and go, you know, but I'm not saying it didn't happen. It happened.
For Wally's son Ed, he says he is very proud of his parents and all the survivors for their courage to tell their stories.
We're being allowed the time and space to keep our culture alive, to keep and honor our parents and all the survivors' truth. And that's what I want to pass on to my children and grandchildren, is allow that time and space for them to be free like my dad had before he came here. The freedom to be out in nature, the freedom to have a happy life.
And for Wally, he says it's time the world knows what happened to so many at residential schools in Canada.
You know, I'm really glad we're starting to see the light. Too bad we had to prove it this way. You know, many of our fellow survivors told these stories, and some people didn't believe us. So hopefully it'll help bring more truth out.
Tina House, APTN National News, Port Alberni.
Thanks, Tina. The National Indian Residential School Crisis Line is available for survivors and others who might need support. The number is 1-866-925-4419. Time to step aside for a quick break, but first, a look at a story we're working on.
I'm Tamara Pimentel. In Kenora, Ontario, those living on the streets say they feel shamed for facing poverty and addictions.
My last known fixed address would be the Kenora District Jail.
All of the names of the people who are not allowed into this particular building.
Basic needs like housing and proper health care aren't easy to come by.
There's always some type of racial or discrimination.
I wish I can have a place of my own. Hang my hat, call it home, right?
And after the lives of 5 youth fall through the cracks, there's an outcry for change.
It feels like we're all living in like a Russian roulette type situation where we never know who's going to be next.
We took to the streets of Kenora to hear from those facing these issues firsthand. Watch for these stories next week on APTN National News.
Welcome back. We sat down with our political panelists, Carrie Benjo and Neegon Sinclair, this week to talk about 2 different topics in the news. One being Melanie Mark, a First Nation woman resigning from the legislature in British Columbia. We also discussed the recent NBA All-Star Game in Salt Lake City, Utah, where Julie Black made a not-so-subtle change to O Canada. Neegon, Carrie, great to have you with us as always. Let's start with BC MLA Melanie Mark, who has resigned, comparing the legislature to, in her words, a torture chamber. Neegon, what do you think? This is not the first Indigenous woman in politics to raise these types of concerns.
No, certainly. I mean, this is something that Leah Gazan, who's an MP here in Winnipeg, talks about regularly. Tina Keeper talked about that as well. And, you know, it's not just the violence against an Indigenous representative, but also the fact that it's violence against an Indigenous woman. And when Melanie Mark resigned, she commented that she was regularly called really inappropriate names. Rhymes with witch is the word that she said that she was regularly called, and that's just simply unacceptable. The kind of decorum that is in Parliament really wouldn't pass any sort of workplace in any other place in the country. People would be held up and for harassment and assault when it comes to the rancor and oftentimes racial epitaphs which are thrown across the chamber. And so I'm not surprised at all that she's just fed up and had enough. You know, being a politician in Canadian politics is hard enough, but then throw in racism, misogyny, and outright violence by men in power and privilege, and this is what you get.
Carrie, there in Saskatchewan, Betty Nippy Albright once pulled out of the NDP leadership race, saying Saskatchewan wasn't ready for a strong Indigenous woman to be leading a provincial party. What do you make of MLA Mark's resignation?
It doesn't surprise me. It is unfortunate that Indigenous women have fought so hard to get to this position. And to be silenced, I think that is the biggest issue. Being an Indigenous woman, being racially profiled, insulted on a regular basis is just part of life. I think the biggest issue is being silenced, being put in a place of power and having that opportunity to bring voices forward and being silenced. I think that is probably the most damaging that they can do to Indigenous women in power.
Carrie, like I said, Betty Nippy Albright said the province, Saskatchewan, wasn't ready for that yet. What is it going to take for a province, any of these provinces, the federal politics, to be ready?
I don't know, perhaps a different party, maybe an alternative party, because right now it's just status quo. And until things take a major change, I don't think we're going to see much change. Not in my lifetime, anyway.
Nigan, like you said there, you've mentioned Tina Keeper, who we have coming up on Face to Face talking about this. And despite that, there's been a huge increase every year or every election of the number of Indigenous people running for politics. Do you think this kind of puts a stain on all that?
Well, it puts a stain on it, but, you know, this isn't just tied to Indigenous peoples. I mean, the fact is that we live in a society in which Indigenous peoples are seen as lesser than, and we're racially profiled from everywhere, from going to a convenience store to seeing movies to we have an ongoing situation of rampant violence happening against murder missing Indigenous women and girls. You know, this is something that Jagmeet Singh, leader of the NDP, deals with regularly, and also, you know, Wab Kinew in Manitoba, who, by the way, likely is to become the very first First Nations premier, if you're to believe the polls, has been regularly profiled by other parties. People regularly attack. And what oftentimes, particularly white men, would get away with in terms of issues in their past or comments that they've made or current behavior. For white men, this is just a blip in their career. They work out just fine. But if you're a brown person, and particularly a brown woman, then what they do is it's a real all-out scale attack. And particularly for Indigenous women, the only issue, as it were, is that they're strong speakers. They're smart, they're brilliant, and that seems to be abnormal enough in Canadian politics to be called angry, as this, you know, swear words, and then on top of that, just be told that they are not welcome here. And then what happens is what Carrie talked about, which is silencing. And if that continues to happen in Canadian politics, we're all lesser than as a result.
Shifting gears now to the world of sports that also crossed over into politics. Julie Black singing "O Canada, Our Home on Native Land" that led to a lot of approval, but also some disapproval. Nigan, what did you make of all that?
Well, what I've said to different media outlets about this is never has so much been made of so little. This is one word. Yes, in a national anthem. Yes, at the NBA All-Star Game. Yes, in an extremely high-profile position. But this is the kind of allyship that every Canadian should be taking in every step in their life, in their living rooms, in their boardrooms. You know, everyday life. This should be what allyship looks like. Thinking about our relationships with Indigenous peoples. All Julie Black really did is what territorial acknowledgements, which is something that you hear regularly at meetings, government offices, and so on. What you hear people say is, we recognize that we share lands with these nations and we commit to a spirit of reconciliation. That's all she did, is by changing a word in the national anthem, is she showed allyship and shared power. So good for her. But I think it's something that every Canadian should be doing. And absolutely anyone who's freaking out about this, if you're worried about that, then I got some bigger issues to talk about. Like, when are we going to return stolen land? When are we going to share lands and resources and the tremendous profit that's been exploited from First Nations? And when are we going to start treating Indigenous peoples like human beings?
Carrie, good points, Nigan. Last word to you, Carrie, your thoughts on Julie Black and the reaction to her changing one word in the national anthem.
I think it really ties into allowing women to speak, allowing women to say what they want to say. She took the opportunity and just spoke. And I think this is one of the reasons why the powers that be, the status quo, want to keep women silenced, because we speak from the heart, we speak with truth, and I think that breeds fear in people because it breeds change. It gets wheels thinking, people moving, and, you know, people are afraid of change, and that's what I see with this. There's so much backlash, and I think it's really important that Julie Black did this now, because on social media there is a movement of Indigenous erasure. There's this growing number of people within the Black community who are claiming that Indigenous people aren't the first people from Turtle Island. And I think it's really important that Julie Black acknowledge that this is Native land.
Carrie and Egon, always great to speak with you and see you. Appreciate you both taking some time for the panel this week.
Yeah, me much, thanks.
Award season is in full swing, and APTN News and Current Affairs have picked up a few more nominations. Details on that after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And our photo today comes from our very own Jesse Andrusko, who took a photo of one of the many big snow sculptures at Festival de Voyageurs here in Winnipeg. We want to see how you're spending your winter. Send your photos to share at aptn.ca or tag APTN News on Instagram. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, -6 with snow in Halifax, sunny and 11 below in Fredericton. -28 in Kuujjuaq, 24 below for Nain. Snow and -14 in Montreal, 18 below in Val-d'Or. -4 with snow in Sault Ste. Marie, flurries and 5 below in North Bay. -7 in Thunder Bay with snow, flurries and 14 below in Sioux Lookout. -18 in God's Lake, Norway House and the Paw. 18 below for Winnipeg, -15 in Brandon and Dauphin. 23 below in Regina, -21 in Saskatoon. 13 below in Meadow Lake, -17 in La Ronge. Over to northern Alberta, -10 in Fort McMurray and Peace River, where snow is expected. 6 below in Edmonton, +1 in Lethbridge. +2 with snow in Victoria, snow and +1 for Vancouver. -6 with flurries in Prince George, 5 below and snow in Smithers. -11 in Old Crow and Whitehorse with snow. 12 below and snow in Yellowknife, -9 with flurries in Norman Wells. -21 in Sax Harbor, 14 below for Paulatuck. -32 in Cambridge Bay, 29 below in Baker Lake. -35 in Resolute, 38 below in Igloo Lake. Two APTN journalists are up for awards at the Canadian Association of Journalists. Brittany Guillot of APTN Investigates is a finalist alongside senior digital reporter Kathleen Martins in the broadcast over 5 minutes category. They were nominated for their work on black robes, and APTN Investigates report detailed lawsuits against Catholic priests and nuns for alleged abuse in Manitoba residential schools. Guillot is a member of the Dene Suling Nation of northern Manitoba. Our news team also recently received 3 Canadian Screen Award nominations for Best National Newscast, Best News or Information Series, and Best News or Information Program. Congrats to everyone, and good luck. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Friday. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow night right here for Hockey Night in Canada in Cree on APTN. The Ottawa Senators will do battle with the Montreal Canadiens. Coverage kicks off here at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm Dennis Ward. Merci for being with us this week. Have a great night.